elephants in the room. I'm here with Matthias Barker. Hello. Guys,
Hello.
You've probably seen him on TikTok or somewhere else. Podcast, you're on YouTube, you do workshops, everything. I have been so pumped for this episode because you guys know I love trauma and all things. And you guys know I'm a big advocate for therapy. So
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
yeah.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
So exciting. This is like going to be such an impactful episode. And obviously, guys, I'll talk about it at the end, but Matthias has so many ways that you can learn so much more from him. I was like stalking your podcast last night and everything. I was oh my gosh, this is all so helpful. So let me introduce Matthias a little bit for anyone who doesn't know him. So Matthias is a licensed mental health counselor specializing in the treatment of complex trauma, childhood abuse, and marital issues. Matthias is widely recognized for his unique approach to making mental health knowledge and skills accessible to the wider public. Matthias delivers psychoeducational content to a following of over 3 million people. His innovative blend of engaging content and relevant mental health advice has fostered a vibrant online community centered on healing, personal growth, and moving toward the meaning in the midst of the hardship.
Yeah, that's me.
Yay. That's him. So yeah, we're excited to be here. We're in Nashville. You guys know I'm like always everywhere, traveling a million places. My life is crazy, but we're here and I'm excited. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today, but kind of the topic, which we already talked about, guys, because we obviously talked before this, but is specifically going to be centered around childhood trauma and the effects of that. We'll talk a little bit about therapy and all that stuff. But yeah, let's just start out.
Yeah.
What is childhood trauma, Matthias? What would you classify as childhood trauma?
Trauma is when pain from the past is getting into your present. And instead of responding in the present to what's just going on, like maybe, being able to be present with people that you really care about, being able to handle something that you're really scared or nervous about, being able to deal with the hardships in your life. The hard thing about trauma is like the hardships in the present are clouded by all the hard stuff that happened in the past. And then you're responding to stuff that's happening right now with all the intensity and all of like what looks on the outside like an overreaction is actually a pretty normal reaction if you were stacking on all the stuff that you went through in the past.
Wow.
So for example, that's like, I don't know, maybe I had a mom or a dad that was really just kind of withholding and didn't give me a lot of encouragement and didn't give me a lot of like praise. Like I just kind of felt like I was in their shadow and I didn't know how to get love and affection. Then I'm in a romantic relationship and maybe I find someone in a relationship where, I don't know, they're kind of withholding and quiet and I don't know, not very verbally affectionate either. And so I get mad at them and I get bitter at them and I get frustrated and I feel lonely and I'm like, maybe I'm losing feelings. Like maybe this isn't the right connection. And the other person's looking at you and like, I don't know, we've been dating like 2 months. Like, I don't know, like, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? And they're looking at it like, whoa, there's a lot of pressure.
Yep.
And that pressure might be the relationship. It could be that your partner needs to talk more. It might also be pressure that's coming from hurt from your past that's getting into your present. So on like a really low level, that's what trauma is. And that can go way, way up. So if we're talking stuff like abuse, we're talking stuff like I've worked with people who have been through human trafficking, who have endured torture. Like, so I've gone all the way up that ladder to the stuff where, stuff like you see in the movies where it's like, whoa, that's trauma. But I can tell you it's the same patterns that go from the stuff at the very top of that ladder all the way to stuff that we don't even really think about as trauma, like not getting the emotional care and love that we longed for, that we desired when we were kids. And it's harder to call that stuff trauma. It feels like we're just whining or complaining. But I think part of my message is like, that's not true. And that doesn't mean like we're trying to pull like a victim card and just be like, oh, hey, look at me. Like I've been through something. It's saying, no, we just need to heal it. Like, and the steps to healing the really intense stuff is actually the same steps that we take to healing what in our minds feels like lower intense stuff. So I don't know. I think of all that stuff as trauma.
That's amazing. I'm like, I literally feel like every time like you talk to David or talk to me, it's just like, so, oh my gosh, it's just like so cool to be in the presence of someone who you've just put in so much work to be so knowledgeable. Obviously you've gone to school, all this stuff, and this stuff is so important. So it's just like so cool. Every time I'm like, oh, I like learned something new. I'm like, that was just, wow. I'm just like kind of taken back. That was awesome. I have so many questions about what you said.
Hit me. All the questions.
I guess starting out, which you kind of touched on a little bit. So trauma affects like our relationships and things in our current life that aren't maybe even directly associated with that trauma. Is that correct? Or do you more mean like if there's something that's going on that's similar, you're feeling the intensity of that wound or that trauma, even if the situation isn't as severe? Or like, how does trauma affect us as adults, I guess you would say?
Yeah. Well, let's put it this way. Like, let's say that I'm scared of dogs. Okay, so, a dog runs up to me and I get really nervous. I kind of start shaking. I don't really feel comfortable. You could ask like, well, why am I scared of this dog? And the obvious answer is like, well, because I had an experience with a dog that wasn't pleasant, or this is brand new. I've never seen anything like this before. And it's reminding me of something that I feel kind of uncomfortable with, so, maybe there's a time when I was a toddler and a kid, or a dog ran up to me and like, maybe it wasn't even like I got bit or something. It was just overwhelming. It was just nervous. It made me kind of feel scared. So all experiences are informed by our past. All emotional reactions are informed by what we've been through in the past. And so when I say like, oh, trauma affects how we engage relationship, or trauma affects how we engage the present, if we were to even zoom out from that, it's just the way that we engage the present is informed by our memories and our experiences. And so that means if we've had experiences that were overwhelming, that's a good like synonym for trauma, by the way. Like, what is trauma? It's when we're overwhelmed. It's when we don't know what to do. It's when like something happens and we're just like draw a blank and we're like, I don't know how to stay safe.
Yeah.
I don't know how to make this go away. I don't know if this means something's wrong with me, right? And so when we encounter overwhelm in our life, then if we don't update that information and we don't realize like, oh wait, no, this dog's safe. If you just don't pull its tail, it won't bite. That's a good example. Then we're going to carry that fear into the future until we update that with grown up information or newer information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I actually remember with my therapist, what she used to have me do is she made me make a trauma timeline, which I recommend for all of you. Make a trauma timeline. Yeah. It was really hard because there was a lot that I blocked out from my childhood. And so it took a lot out of me to like really go through each year and be like, okay, what happened this year? What happened this year? Like, and a lot was blocked out, but I slowly memories like started to come back up. But yeah, so she had me make a trauma timeline. Guys, also that's Coco. That's my puppy. She's whining.
We love Coco.
We do love Coco. But yeah, she had me make a trauma timeline. And then the way she had me try to heal and start to take the steps was I would go through an event. I would write down my anxiety before I read it, my anxiety after, and then I would read a Bible verse. And then I would write my anxiety after I read the Bible verse.
What was that like for you?
It was really healing. And it kind of what you were saying, like you're kind of saying you have to rewire that experience to have it be positive. So is that kind of like one of the ways to like heal through trauma? She even had me one time, she was like, I want you to go through some of these traumatic events, do the same thing, but with David. I want you to read them to David. Yeah. Wow. So I didn't really understand completely why she had me do that. But is that kind of what you're saying? Like kind of the
Yeah. Well, here's the pieces that are complicated is like when trauma stuff comes up, like let's say you're having panic attacks or some sort of like, I get really irritable in my relationship and I get angry and I yell. And I'm like, I don't know why I yell. It's not always easy to know like, okay, well, what traumatic experience is that connected to? Because it's not like I know in my head when I'm yelling that's about my mom's, neglect or something. Like I know for me, like I struggled with overeating for a long time, like in my 20s. And it wasn't obvious to me what that was connected to. Or, I even had like a huge problem with authority in school. I would challenge my professors, not like in a cool genius academic way, but just like in a kind of a grumpy, like kind of, I don't know, arrogant way. I would just be super combative.
Yeah.
And then, like my teachers would just be like, gosh, you're kind of hard to deal with in class. Yeah. And it was weird because like my wife was like, that's just not who you are as a person. Like you're not, grumpy and arrogant and trying to just be argumentative for no reason.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, I'm not. But when I'm in class, it just comes out of me. And so something I always tell clients is like the behavior that needs changed is often a wound that needs healed. And drawing that line from I'm acting this way because I went through something like this is kind of a journey. It's kind of a journey to figure out what that is connected to.
Yeah.
And then after you make that connection, like what you're talking about, when you make that trauma timeline, and it's like, okay, here's the things in my past that I feel like really need some healing. Then after that, it's like, here's a few steps that I kind of teach, in my courses or in my, stuff online or, with clients, is that has to be like witnessed and seen by someone. Like, it's not just that we have to have almost kind of like this aha moment of like, oh, okay, now I'm realizing I shouldn't overeat, like that's, of course, like we all could just say that. We've all like, oh, I know I shouldn't overspend.
Right.
But it's more like someone has to like emotionally see where you're at. Someone has to like catch that deep emotional place and feel that with you.
Right. So you can feel validated.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And we call that witnessing in the psychology world, right? So it has to be witnessed. And not just witnessed intellectually. Like I tell you, like, okay, well, I went through this as a kid, and then my dad, like, was really violent and da-da-da-da-da. Okay, it's witnessed. No. I'm talking like kind of going there emotionally in your heart, letting yourself feel all the heavy emotions, which is super uncomfortable. And then in that place, someone comes alongside you and is like, wow, I didn't know you went through that. And not just what happened, but what was it like? What was it like to go through that? Oh yeah, my dad kind of like spanked us a lot as kids, but spanking was just a thing back then, and that's kind of how I grew up, and it wasn't a big deal. Like, no, but what was that like? Well, I mean, I shouldn't have freaked out because I really shouldn't have actually like, snuck out at night. Like that was actually kind of my fault. So I mean, if we're being honest, I was asking for it. Hold on. What was it like? Well, I mean, you can't really blame him. He didn't know. Like he just grew up, and that's how his dad raised him. So I'm like, hold on. What was it like for you? And we have such a hard time, Nicole, just backing up and being like, it was awful. I was terrified. I hated it. I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was a bad kid. I remember just waiting and then seeing him come in the room. And I didn't know what I was going to do, and I couldn't get out, and there's nothing I could do to change it. And then letting yourself kind of tear up, letting yourself kind of feel it for a second, you're going to realize your chest gets kind of tight and you kind of start feeling fidgety, like kind of get triggered, right? That's what that means.
Right.
But in safety, like you're with someone that cares about you, that loves you, that's hearing you, that has a bit more wisdom than you. So that can be a therapist, that can be a mentor, that can be a good friend. I've known people where like their big brother was that person for them. I think a pastor can be that. I think God can be that. I think that people feel healing by bringing stuff to God in prayer and kind of have a similar sort of experience. It's like, oh, I feel seen. And the way I think about that is like, before the truth of the circumstance can really feel right, we have to name the truth of what it was like to be there. And it's like, oh, well, okay, the truth was it wasn't my fault. Like we can say that out loud and nod our heads like, okay, yeah, it wasn't my fault. But that won't click. That actually won't heal anything until it's like someone sees what it was like to be there. Like, oh, it felt like this. It was like that. Whoa. And then, when you're in that place, that's when like the real kind of like deep, dark beliefs kind of start to come to the surface. The ones that we know aren't true, but feel true. Like I kind of brought it on myself. Like, honestly, if I was probably just better, if I just got my grades right, then none of that would have happened. It was kind of me. Then that's when that moment with the other person, sometimes it's the other person, sometimes the truth just kind of emerges naturally of like, well, hold on. Would you tell any other kid that? If there was any other kid that went through that experience, would you tell him it was probably your fault if you just did your grades better, then that wouldn't have happened? And then there's almost like this weird, like, I like to think of it like there's like this two circuits in your brain are firing at the same time. And I like to think of it like there's sparks going off because it's like, that doesn't compute. Like, what in the world? Like, well, no, I wouldn't tell a kid that, but I would tell myself that. And well, why? Why would I tell myself that and not someone else that? And that's the healing. That's the rewiring of taking what we already know, for being honest. It's not like there's often these big aha moments are not things that like, oh, no one ever told me that. It's like, it's stuff we kind of know, but it's almost like what's in our head gets to our heart. And we feel it in our belly. We feel it in our chest when before we only knew how to hold it in our brains. And that, I think, is like that turnaround moment. Like, that's
kind of where the healing comes from.
Yeah, like, oh. And I like to think of it, so there's the truth of what you experienced, but then there's like the truth that emerges in loving relationship. And then that's how you get the head and the heart to come into the same place.
Wow.
And then what you believe feels right. And that's the thing that I think just talking about it over and over, or just reading a bunch of psychology books sometimes doesn't really do. It's like, it has to feel right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we want in our hearts, is like to stop doubting, to stop questioning, to stop looking in the mirror and feeling like we're disgusting, even though we're telling ourselves that we look good. Right. We should feel confident.
There's like that connection missing of like feeling it in your heart versus your head.
And
so interesting.
That's what I want for people. I want you to feel like you send the text, they don't text you back, and you're not there anxious, worried. You feel okay. Like in all those small places that it really just, from head to toe feels congruent.
Yep.
That's the healing.
Wow.
Tell me what your reaction to that
is.
Yeah. What does that bring up for you?
I mean, a lot. It's just crazy because, it's funny when you talked about, when you text them back and they don't text you back. It's so funny. That's always a trauma that I've had. Yeah. An abandonment wound from my parents. Right. Parents were addicts. Yeah. Everyone watching this should know that by now. But they were both drug addicts, and like I was super attached to my mom. And whenever she would leave, I never knew when she was going to come back and if she was going to be okay or if she was going to end up in jail or whatever. And so I would call her and she wouldn't answer, and I would just call and call and call, and I would just hyperventilate. I felt like I was going to pass out. I felt like I was going to die. And I was just so consumed and so worried about her. And I mean, that bled into, even my adult life. And now it's gotten better over time. But like if my boyfriend or someone that I love doesn't pick up the phone, I like think they're dead. Like I think they're either dead or that they don't love me anymore.
Right.
Those are the two things. I'm like, it's one of those things. And so even when we were first dating, me and David, I was like, listen, even if you're busy, just pick up on the ring and say, I'm busy, just so I know you're alive. Because if not, I'm like literally going to shut down and think that like you're dying, or that you decided that you don't love me anymore.
That's a good example of what I was talking about earlier, where it seems like on the outside we're overreacting. Right? It's like, well, I'm just not texting you. What do you mean you think I was dead? Like, why are you freaking out? Right. But then when you go deeper, it's like, well, that actually is a pretty normal reaction to a daughter being like, where's my mom? And I have no idea where she is. Right. And then calling and being like, I can't survive without you. Like, I depend on you for everything. And now you're just, I can't even get a hold of you. It is a complete threat. That is like life-threatening fear. And then that's what's coming up when you're not getting the text back. Right. And that's a trigger. That's what a trigger is.
Which is it's so crazy to learn that stuff, because you're like, oh, wow. Like, and this is, I have so many questions, but to jump on that, the trigger thing. Yeah, I always try to explain this to people, and I feel like you'll be able to shed a lot of light. Like, what happens to the mind, the body when we get triggered? So when we get triggered by a certain event or something that makes us think of some type of traumatic event that has happened in our past, like what actually happens to us? Because I know for me, obviously, initially you shut down, you may have a panic attack, something like that, cry, emotions. And then I know for me, the next day I wake up and I literally feel like I got like hit by a bus and my body's just like, it's like, why does that happen?
Yeah. Well, there's 4 different responses that the body falls into when it's terrified, when it's scared. So as we were talking about, I'm not just reacting to like getting ghosted on text. Like, I'm reacting to the whole thing with like mom not being there and I don't even know when she's coming back. So that fear you're feeling in that moment isn't about the text. It's about all the stuff that happened back then. So that fear response hits your body in a way that's really intense and really severe. And there's kind of like 4 stages. You could think of them almost like stairs, like if you want to visualize it, kind of like different steps as far as intensity. The first stage is something called hyperarousal. And what that means, it's not like arousal, like kind of like romantic arousal or something. It's like, I feel really jittery. My heart's racing. Like I'm kind of shaking a little bit. My mind is just kind of moving around. My eyes are jolting back and forth. You could think about it like, I don't know, like a deer that's spooked and it's just like hopping around the forest. Like, like there's this hypervigilance. That's kind of the long word for I'm really aware of everything that's happening around me. All my senses are dialed to 11. And that's a threat response to keep you from like a predator. That's like all the wiring that's kind of being fired off then is, there's a bear chasing me. I need to get away from the bear. Now, you and I are more complex animals than just deer. And so we actually have that same response to like social situations and like complex stuff. Like, am I going to get into this degree program, or is this person going to text me back? We respond like with our bear like threat system, but to, you know, everyday social stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's
so
not obvious.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's like, well, why am I responding that way? It's like, well, because that's been your hardwiring. And humans for the last however long we've been here have been dealing with bears longer than we've been dealing with not getting texted back. So like all of our hardware is designed for bears, you know, so that's kind of just the funny part of it, is it makes it not obvious. So that's the first step, right? Hyper arousal. And then we kind of move into something that is a little bit like strange. It's this in-between stage called freeze. And what freeze is like, I'm still like heart racing. I'm still like kind of like freaking out, but I don't know how to move. And I just like, I'm just going to try not to draw attention to myself. And I'm just going to stay here and be quiet and still. And a deer will do that too. Funny enough, when like a deer in the headlights, that expression is, if you were to take like the heart rate of that deer, it's super like blood pressure spiked. Like it's still really aroused. It's like wild, but they're frozen. And the theory behind that is a lot of the predators that humans have been dealing with, I don't know, their sight is really based on movement. And so for a lot of mammals, like a lot of mammals have that freeze response, because if we're like still, it's harder to see us, depending on our predators' like way that they see things. So I don't care one way or another about the science of that, but we have this freeze response. That's kind of an in-between stage. You could think of that as like a bridge over into something called hypoarousal. So there's hyper arousal and hypo. And hypo is kind of the opposite of hyper arousal. So hypoarousal is when you just kind of go numb.
Wow.
And it's like you kind of go limp. And it's not like really jagged and you're just It's like it's really almost like you get way in your head. So in hyperarousal, you're not thinking very much, you're just reacting. But in hypoarousal, you're really in your head. Wow. You kind of feel like numb, your heart rate goes down. And it's a really severe response. It can go as severe, and I don't know, this isn't like a fourth stage in the sense that the biology really changes. It's just a more intense version of hypoarousal, but you can go all the way into something called submit, which means that I almost kind of lose track of what's happening around me. And this is like what happens when we're like really in a threatening situation. Like if we're like essentially the bear goddess, you could think of it like that. The bear goddess, and my brain doesn't know how to cope with the idea of I'm getting attacked right now. And so I just kind of check out and almost kind of get dissociated from my body. Now, that doesn't just happen when getting like taken over by a bear. Now, social situations that can feel that intense to us will trigger those same reactions. So there's times I do a lot of couples counseling. I do a lot of couples counseling for folks who are like in domestic violence, like they fight each other violently. And so I do a lot of work with them. And you'll totally see hypoarousal like flood up before the fists come out, before the violence starts. You have one person that's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you just sitting there? Like, you should be helping me clean. And then the other person just goes, shoop, and they just kind of go into a freeze state maybe for a second. And they're like, ba-boom, ba-boom, heart racing. But they just kind of freeze in there. Like, why are you just sitting there? Like, you're not taking this seriously. You're not listening to me. Like, gosh, you always do this. And then as the intensity of the situation kind of escalates, the hypoarousal kicks in. And then they just kind of go numb. And then they're not even paying attention and listening to what's going on. They're like barely there, which gets the other person infuriated. And it's like this, you know, kind of perfect storm of responses. And that's just because the biology is so intense. Now, in circumstances like that, it's not just that they're, because you'd be like, oh, well, why are you going into such an intense response just by someone telling you to like take out the trash or, you know, help me clean the house. And that's where triggers are really helpful, because it's not just you're reacting to the trash. You're reacting to, let's say, your dad beating you when you were a kid, or your mom neglecting you and, you know, by her addiction or something. So here you are in a fight with the person you love more than anyone in the world, like your romantic partner. And then they're coming at you really intensely. And then all the stuff is flooding up from your childhood that was, you know, in this case, in this example, really intense. So all of that is almost compounding. It's like stacking on top of each other. And then your brain just goes dark.
Wow.
So that's hypoarousal.
Wow.
So if you want to break it down in stages, it's like hyper, freeze, hypo. And then
which is like, so the first one is like the fear of like
Yeah.
So you're like analyzing.
Yeah. Really like intense shaking, heart race.
Okay. Yeah. So
you're
you start to
hypervigilant. That's the first one.
And then you freeze.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you try to like numb, hiding.
Yeah.
And then the last one is like disassociating.
Yeah. Submit, is kind of what it's technically called, which is where you just go numb. But what's wild, and not to make this overly complicated, you can actually have mixed states as well, which means you're kind of frozen and your heart's racing and then your mind just kind of goes blank.
Wow.
So that's where it starts to get a little complicated when we're in, I don't know, we're like traveling around, for example, like you're always on the road, like you have tons of people like around you all the time. It can feel really overwhelming. And then when overwhelm hits you, it's like, I feel just kind of almost numb emotionally to it. Like I don't feel like I'm totally here, but I'm also kind of nervous and everyone's making me a bit uncomfortable. So you feel kind of agitated and jumpy, but also kind of not really there mentally. It's like,
so it can be a little bit of both.
Totally.
So that's that's crazy because that's real. I feel like that is when I get triggered by trauma, that is probably the exact cycle that I go through. Or like you said, a little bit of mixture, and people in my life, that's what I feel like they go through too. So that's like generally, if you get triggered, that's generally the things that you're going to experience.
Yeah. Another way people talk about it is fight or flight. Right. And it's the same kind. That's hyper arousal.
Right.
Yeah. So
that's so interesting that like we're wired that way to like you said, social stuff and like emotional stuff hits us the same as like if we were like physically seeing a bear like attacking us, which that I'm so glad you brought up fight or flight, because I feel like that's something that people talk about a lot, like, oh, survival mode, like I'm in survival mode. So like if you are being constantly triggered by something in your life, what does that like do to your body? And like, how do you get out of survival? I feel like a lot of people feel like they're in survival mode. And I think, it's like over glamorized a little bit for sure of like, oh, everyone's in, but like, I do think like, I feel like I've lived in survival mode a lot of my life. Yeah. So like, how do you break out of that? Is it just the healing of the trauma? Is it, combined with obviously like holistic things? Like what would you say would be like the quickest and easiest way to get your body out of fight or flight mode? Yeah.
Well, okay. So there's two ways, and it depends on which stage you're in. So not a lot of people know this. I'm glad you asked this question. This is something I like to really tell people about because these are such helpful tools that really aren't obvious. But there's something called top-down regulation, and there's something called bottom-up regulation. So here's what top-down is. It means your brain calms down your body. Bottom-up is when your body calms down your brain. Okay? When you're in hyper-arousal, you need your brain to calm down your body. When you're in hypo-arousal, you need your body to calm down your brain. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we need to talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Okay, I know, that's kind of a big one. Yeah.
So, sorry, explain one more time. So, hypo-arousal is the first step, right? When you're kind of like jittering around.
So, you can think like hyper, like a hyper kid, like can't sit still. Okay. So, if you're like a hyper kid, you can't sit still, you need to talk about it. You need to kind of like have a little bit of time to kind of come down off of that hyper state and then get your brain back online.
So from mind to body.
From mind to body. So here's what that means practically, because this isn't obvious. Right. If you're in a fight with someone, for example, you're arguing, you actually need to take a break. You need to step away from that because you're not in a state where you're like, really firing on all cylinders. When you're in hyper arousal, there's this part of your brain that's right towards the front called the frontal cortex, the part of you that is like rationalizing and trying to empathize and trying to like hear the other person's argument and trying to problem solve. So that part of your brain's shutting down in hyper arousal. So in this first stage, the hyper kid, that front of the brain isn't really on. So you're like trying to problem solve and talk about who's going to take the dog out, but your ability to empathize and to problem solve and to hear where the other person's coming from is really diminished. It's like, it's kind of like that part is like slowly coming offline. And so you need to come back online before you have an argument with someone. And the best way they've shown to do that in the data is take about 30 minutes to an hour and just get some alone time, and then be able to sit back and wait, think through kind of what's going on, bring that brain back online, so that you can then re-engage, and you'll notice kind of the jitters, that hyperness starts to kind of settle down. Wow. So a lot of people talk about things like CBT therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy is what that stands for. That's kind of almost like a lot of mental exercises to kind of test and be like, okay, is what I'm thinking rational? Is what I'm thinking really checking out. Do I have evidence to really think that how I'm responding is like logical right now?
Yeah.
And that gets a bad rap. A lot of people are kind of in the trauma world, it's kind of in fad to be like anti-CBT. But what I see a lot of that as is like strategies to get the brain back online. And so that's actually super helpful in some cases. Being able to take a step back. And like that's why I loved what your therapist was doing. It's like find a Bible verse that kind of directly attaches to something that you're going through, or you know, kind of take some deep breaths, kind of look around and be just like, all right, I'm just going to wait, and I'm going to wait for my brain to turn back online. Is super helpful. Now, some people would say in moments like that, you should be doing like a lot of breathing exercises. You should be doing some stretching, some like muscle relaxation, stuff like that. Now, what the data is showing is that can be helpful sometimes for some people. But when you're in hyperarousal, remember, that's the really like jittery one. If you're in hyperarousal, sometimes that can make it worse. And for some folks, they're doing breathing exercises in hyperarousal, and then they start kind of slipping into a panic attack because their like heart is racing, right? And then they start breathing really heavy. You know, you can see that almost kind of like elevates it. That almost makes it worse. And so for some folks, they need something to kind of like calm them down. So here's one of my favorite ones. Just for anyone listening, is what I call just like the 5 things game. So if I have a client, for example, sitting there starting to go into hyperarousal, we'll pause and I'll be like, name 5 things in the room that are green. And then you have to kind of jump out and then say them out loud. I'm like, oh, okay, this water bottle, this light bulb, this that railing. I'm like, okay, name 5 things here that if you would touch them, they'd be cold. And you're like, well, that glass, like, you know, and the reason that game works is because the only way that you can really talk and describe that is by turning on the front of your brain. Because that is where you think about things like
logically. Yeah.
And where you think about the 5 senses. You know, you think about sight and smell and taste and touch. And so as silly as that sounds, be like, tell me like 7 of your favorite celebrities.
That's so funny.
Weird. Okay, I gotta think about that.
That's something me and David will do. Like if he starts getting a little anxious,
that's right.
I will be like, okay, tell me like, where were you born? How many sisters do you have? Pull on all my fingers, like smell, like check your 5 senses to like see, like we do that. And usually it'll calm both of us down. Yes. Which is so interesting.
Well, that was a good intuition. Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that my therapist or why we started doing that, because I know, and my therapist has said this before, like logically, I just like, if I'm triggered by my trauma, David will always say too, he's like, you're not thinking logically. I'm like, yeah, I can't. Like all I'm thinking is emotional.
That's right.
And so it's like my brain can't. So it's like you said, taking a step back. Yeah. Calm down. And self-soothing or doing what you're saying. Then you can go back and like approach it with logic. But if I'm triggered, I'm like, I cannot think about it logically. You can tell me, oh yeah, like this is okay. And this, I'm not going to hear you. There's like a wall. It just doesn't go through. I don't know why.
Well, and that's kind of what I was describing earlier, where it's like, we often know the answer. Like we know what to do. It's not like that's new information. We're triggered and we're responding to the past. And so someone's like, hold on, you're overreacting. And it's like, well, yeah, because I'm responding to the past. Right. And so you need to get your brain back into a place where you can get back to the present. Instead of being back there, you're in the present.
Gotcha.
So when you're in hyper arousal, the way to do that is kind of these silly brain games and just time. So 30 minutes to an hour is what's been shown to kind of let your hormone levels come back to a normal place. And one of the best things I ever did in my marriage was when we're in a fight, we chill for like 30 minutes to an hour. It feels like, here's why no one wants to do that. It feels like, oh, if we stop talking now, we're never going to get back to it. And we're just going to like sweep it under the rug. And then I'm like, okay, fine. Just make a contract with your partner. Yeah. That we're not going to do that. Right. And if we're going to take an hour break, then we're going to come back. And then for yourself, it feels like, oh, I can't avoid this. Like I can't like pretend like this isn't real. Like I got to figure this out.
Yeah. Because you're like in the thick of the emotion.
And strange as it sounds, I think social media is totally okay to use in this. Like as funny as it sounds, TikTok can be something that kind of brings your brain back online when you're hyper aroused. Yep. And I think a lot of us feel guilty about that. We're like, oh, I'm like distracting myself. I'm just coping. And I'm like, coping's not always bad. Like there's bad ways to cope. And then there's ways that you just need to get your brain back and then get off TikTok and don't just like repress it and dismiss it, never talk about it again. Come back to it and really think through it. But Not a lot of people know that.
It's so funny. I feel like you're talking to me because I used to feel that way so much. Like if I was in the thick of a feeling or an emotion, I'm like, no, I need to deal with this right now. Like this isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
You're just so in it, you know? And then my therapist used to be like, take 24 hours. She used to say that, which maybe it's just because my trauma, whatever. And I was like, okay. And like, she was like, self-soothe. If you start feeling yourself, like you need to like do activities, things that just get your mind somewhere else. And I hated that when she first told me that. I hated it. I was like, no, like I want to deal with this right now. Like, yeah, just like you're saying, like thinking, oh, I'm distracting myself, or I need to feel guilty, or this isn't like good to like remove myself.
Well, and it makes total sense. That's like, you're like, oh, a bear's chasing me. And then someone's like, well, just go self-soothe.
Yeah, you're like no.
No, we need to climb up a tree, or we need to like get across a waterfall, or like, and you're like, no, dude, like just tell me 10 things that are green. And you're like, shut up, there's a bear. You know, like that's how you feel.
Yeah. But so, that's how your brain starts to be able to, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
I would love Chick-fil-A.
Tell David a number 2. Number 2 with a large diet lemonade.
We're keeping this in. This is
that's my Chick-fil-A order. And tell them I'll Venmo them later. That's great. Large diet lemonade. Oh, I love that diet lemonade. That's just great.
Good stuff.
I do.
Oh yeah, he wants
French
the
fries
meal.
Are great. The waffle fries are so good.
Brent, can I do an 8-count nugget? No, 8.
Wow.
Well, what number is that? Do you guys know the nugget meal? Oh, what number?
I think it's 8 or 8 or 12.
I've read so many books on narcissism and everything because, you know, we won't get into it.
Oh, we could. Narcissism's great. Go ahead.
We could, but
that's all just trauma. Yeah.
No, literally. But yeah, I was talking about like how narcissists are created, and it's like an over what's it called? Nurturing in the like external image side of things. So like basketball games, they're like always there cheering their kid on, doing all this. Like at the school publicly, they're like so loving their kid, but then they emotionally neglect them at home. Like if the kid comes with like a puzzle and is like, Mom, I like did this puzzle. They're like, I'm busy. So like,
I think narcissism happens way earlier than that.
Really?
So my like just clinical take on it.
Yeah. What do you, I would love to hear.
I think it can, I think it usually solidifies around age 2, 3.
Wow.
And it's when the kid realizes, oh, the game we're playing that looks like nurture for me, it's actually more about mom or dad's being okay. And they catch on that they're being used. And then what happens there is that they lean in to whatever game is being played to get their needs met. So for example, like the kid is spoiled materially, like I'll get you the iPhone, I'll get you the iPad, whatever, is like, oh, mom isn't actually there to fill my needs. The only way I get my needs met is if I essentially like whine, complain, become difficult. You know, and this is in the material example. It can show up in different ways in different situations. But like I'm going to be so self-absorbed because that's the only way I get my needs met.
Wow.
And because essentially my needs aren't even noticed unless I just become brazen and just like scream them from the rooftops. And so then that's reinforced, right? Because mom gives the iPhone once I complain and I start becoming really difficult unless I get the iPhone. And since that just gets reinforced over and over and over, they realize that's how I get love in the world. That's how I get love professionally. That's how I get loved academically, romantically, is the way to get my needs met is to become this kind of self-absorbed, difficult person. And they might not describe it like this. This is all like, we're talking like this is unconscious. This is in the bones and in the nervous system. But that's what narcissism does. It's pain. And it's pain of realizing you're actually being neglected.
Wow.
And used. So for example, even in like cases of abuse where, someone's violent, there's often this like pawn kind of game thing where the reason I'm violent towards you isn't because you're doing something that isn't making me feel okay. And so narcissism can come out of really intense abusive situations too. Wow. So it's not always like the material stuff.
Yeah.
That's why I say like, you can't spoil a kid by just doting over them and giving them love, because love is the thing that protects against narcissism. Love is the thing that cures narcissism. Genuine attunement is the thing that guards them, not just from narcissism in their own hearts, but being susceptible to narcissists. Because the other side of the spectrum here is people pleasing, which I actually think is in the same genre as narcissism.
Yeah, which was me.
Hey, me too.
Codependency, people pleasing. I mean,
it's the same self-obsession. This is
like it's the control, because you know that the way that you will receive love is by what you can provide to that other person, and being a chameleon to whatever their needs are.
Took the words out of my mouth.
Been there.
That's it.
Done that.
Yeah, high five. Yeah. Like I've worked with people in military situations where their like commander was just like really just intense, and but they're not going to like set a boundary with their commander. That's just not the culture, and that would be it would be punished severely. But they don't want to give up their like career in the military. So like, but for them, it's not like, oh, I'm compromising on my boundaries by staying here. It's like, okay, well, what is your line? That's actually a good question to set. Like, it's not like, oh, I'll just put up with anything. It's like, well, what is the line? Right. And then I'm going to take ownership over that line. And then anything that happens like behind that line, like let's say that, okay, they're going to cuss and yell at me, but I want this job and this is an internship that I want to keep, to switch the analogy a little bit. So like if I like I'm in an internship for a job and they really treat me like, you know, terrible, get this coffee, get the chai tea, you know, and they treat me like I'm subhuman, you know, like maybe I put up with that, but that's okay because I'm taking ownership of it. Here's what that means. You can't complain and you can't get bitter because you picked. That's where it confronts the people pleaser. Okay, so because you're like, well, they shouldn't treat me that way. Nope, you signed up for it. You drew that line. You have to take accountability for it, or you have to change. And you have to say, that's not what I'm willing to do. I'm not going to be treated like, you know, trash to go get a chai latte. Right?
Matthias should be spitting bars this whole episode.
Let's go. I'm telling you, that everyone. Is freedom for a people pleaser. You can choose that. Yeah. And that's okay.
You just have to be accountable for it.
Yeah. And it's and I'm not saying that how they treat you then is your fault. Don't take it all the way there. That's why you pick your line. Like, okay, you can cuss me out. I'm going to put up with that because I want this internship. I want this job. But if you started like physically abusing me, I'm out. Or if you started making like romantic advances on me, then I'm out. Yeah. Right. And so it's like, oh, okay, do this weird like sexual thing or I'm out. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, like that's the line. I'm gone. You know, and I think that when you have that line established, you don't have to feel guilty.
Okay, I kind of want to scale it back a little bit more about you. Why do you do what you do? Why have you spent all the years in school and all the time and all the hours you spend, you know, because it's more than just being a psychotherapist. Like, you put it online where you're giving access to all these tools and all these things and all this really free information you don't need to give. Like, you could easily just be meeting with clients and, you know, making money that way and all that. So it's like, what drives you to do what you do? Why do you do it? Why do you care?
Yeah. I'll give you the honest answer, because there's like probably like a good movie answer that looks really polished and great and it's all altruistic. But I'll tell you the real one is I was trying to figure out my own stuff. So I went to school because I had abuse in my past. That wasn't from my parents. It was from someone at my church that I didn't know how to heal. And so I went to school looking for answers from me. And then I got into client sessions and I'm, you know, it's not completely self-absorbed. I do care about people, you know, so I started working with people. But I started working with clients that were really similar to the stuff that I went through as a kid. Wow. And so then I'm counseling, trying to help fix them and hoping that if I could figure out how to fix them, then I could help fix me. And so there was kind of this self-focused, I mean, and it's understandable. It's not like I was using people in any negative way, but it wasn't entirely just altruistic. It was like this, I really want to figure out my own stuff because I'm in pain. I was in a lot of pain. Wow. So I was in a lot of pain during my master's program. And then that first year of counseling was really hard. I didn't feel super healthy. And then, as funny as this sounds, and I don't think I've actually talked about this publicly on a podcast yet. So I blew up on TikTok kind of right at the tail end of a pretty dark part of my life where I was having a really hard time. And there was a few things that happened where I was starting to kind of come on the up. Like, I just felt like God was really coming after my heart and I got really reconnected with my faith in a big way. And so that was like, but that was just starting. I'm talking like a couple months, like around after a turnaround for my mental health. That's when TikTok blew up and I got like 1 million followers in 1 month. Wow. And I was like, oh, snap. Like,
you're like, this is happening.
Yeah. And then everyone's looking to me and I'm like, oh guys, like I'm still trying to figure out my own stuff. And And so I'm sharing notes. That's how it felt. Like I'm sharing, like here's my field notes of where I've like gone so far. I'm trying to figure this out too. Wow. And what was cool was like, when I started posting stuff online, that kind of created opportunities, just because when you have kind of a larger following, just sometimes just some of your professional opportunities open up in different ways to get mentorship and training from some really incredible people. And then it was actually in some of those relationships that some of these men that took me in just could see what was going on. They were seeing like, oh, here's a guy who has some of his own stuff that he's trying to heal in his own heart. And he's really genuinely trying to help the world, but he's also trying to help himself. And kind of went beyond just like the professional, like, oh, here, let me teach you like the step-by-step check boxes. And just like, Matthias, how you doing? Yeah. And it wasn't therapy, but it was like this mentorship that I think particularly a guy named Frank Anderson, he just like could see into my heart and be like, here, I want to come alongside you in a deeper way. And it wasn't just that he trained me professionally. It was that he kind of came alongside me personally in a way that was really healing. That's and then awesome. Came into some really deep insight. Probably like, this is like a year into doing TikTok, like 6 months to a year into doing TikTok, where I felt like I really kind of found healing in my trauma for kind of the first time in my life. Wow. And that was weird to do on when you have stage. When you have eyes on you and people looking to you to be like, help me. And and I wanted to, you know, like, and I wanted to help people. And I feel like I did. Like, I feel like there's things that I was saying, like when I look back at my old content, like it was still good stuff, but it was just incomplete. And so I feel like now, especially in the past year and a half, is like where I feel like I've come into my own in a really different way, because when you come to this topic, having experienced so much of it yourself and done that personal work, you bring so much more presence into this kind of thing. And so I feel like I'm positioned now to do some of my best work is like for other people. Yeah. And to be able to really help. And then for the first time, it really is just genuinely about them. And I feel like really present. I feel like really engaged with my kids and my wife and my family. And I feel like I have these incredible friendships. I'm really active at my church. Like I have these mentor relationships where I feel like grounded and whole for like the first time in my life, Nicole. That's so cool. And then the work that's coming out now, I feel like is so much more attuned to what my audience needs. Right. And where they're at, instead of me just kind of taking the social media thing as an excuse to kind of do personal exploration, which again, it's not like that was a bad thing to do. I think people connected with it because it was so raw and real. Like I think that's why it like quote unquote worked. Like why the videos went as crazy as they did is because it was personal. It's because I was going through it. Like so many of those videos, when you watch those old videos, 90% of those videos are me talking to myself. Wow. Like it's just me talking to myself in the mirror, trying to be like, I just want to heal this so bad. Yeah. And so now I think my voice has shifted, and now I'm talking, I mean, out of a place of healing, but to the people who are genuinely coming to me needing help. And I feel like I had one arm tied behind my back that whole time. And so now I feel like I got both my hands, and it feels really great. What an amazing answer. That was so honest. That's the honest That's really cool. That's a cool story though, that it but through that journey, you probably learned so much. And gosh. Yeah. Like all the hyper arousal. It was this big intellectual journey, but also a deeply personal one. Yeah. And God knew. Like, that's right. You know, he put you in that position, and it's like, and then it all worked together, but it's cool. I know you've helped a lot of people. I feel like everyone that we know knows you. It's just like, oh yeah, he's a therapy guy on TikTok. And we're like, yeah. So cool. Yeah. Awesome. It's kind. Okay. Well, let's see where we are. I have some important questions, so I don't want to miss them. Hit me. So I want to go back to, as a kid. So when we describe childhood trauma, like you said, it's an event that makes you overwhelmed, maybe fearful. That's right. As kids, like, what are our needs as kids? Like, why do certain things that happen that maybe don't traditionally look like trauma affect us as children? Like, what are our needs emotionally? And how do those small things affect us as kids? Does that make sense? Like, what are those needs? 4 things. We have 4 needs as kids. The first one is we need safety. Just like and we're talking just the general stuff, not even just emotional safety there. I'm just talking like you need to not be in threat out in the rain like predators. Like you need safety from a parent. You need nurture. So that's the emotional stuff. You need someone to really see where you're at in your own heart. And then beyond that, you also need like equipping. You need someone to show you how to navigate the world. This is a complex place. Social relationships are complex. It's not obvious. So you need someone to guide you through. And specifically in that stage, in the equipping stage, it's to show you when you make a mistake, it's not because something's wrong with you. It's because something was wrong with your strategy. And that is not a lesson the kid will just
naturally
stumble
learn
into by trial and error.
Gotcha.
They will always think it's because something's wrong with me. And so it's the job of a parent to make sure to drill it in. It wasn't you, it was the strategy. So there's still personal responsibility there, right? And then the fourth one is encouragement. And that's to name their identity. We mirror back our identity, our self-esteem is the compilation, the collage of the voices in our life that have told us who we are.
Wow.
And when we are wrestling with insecurity, we're wrestling with conflicting voices in our past, and we're trying to reckon with that in the present. It's like, it is, I think, the foundational job of a parent to hit all four of those is best you know how. We're going to make mistakes. I'm a parent.
Right.
I'm going to make mistakes with my daughter and my son. But those are the four like bullseyes that I'm aiming for. Safety, nurture, equipping, encouragement. Now you asked about like why we kind of go through stuff and we don't remember, we don't kind of label it as trauma. A lot of our trauma is the stuff that didn't happen that should have happened.
Wow. That's going to be a crazy clip right there.
I'm telling you, and it's not obvious, but it's like you don't have a memory of it because you wouldn't have a memory of something that didn't happen.
So it's like, I guess, that's why I wanted to ask that question of like, what do we need as kids? Because which is the whole next point, which we kind of talked about previously, is like, it's really easy to look at severe traumatic events in someone's life. Like I said, my parents, drug addicts, foster care, all that kind of stuff. So you can look at that and be like, oh yeah, this person has trauma, right? But what people aren't seeing is like, if those four things aren't happening or one of those four things are being neglected, you're going to have some kind of wound or like you said, like it's almost sometimes not what happened, but what didn't happen.
Yeah. It was overwhelming because you had to engage the world without something you needed.
Wow.
Right. So you get bad grades in school. And then you didn't have a parent that encouraged you and told you, this isn't because you're stupid. This is because you didn't study right. Let's get into it. And not out of this judgmental, like, you just need to study more, but like, let me sit with you, work with you, be here out of a nurturing place. Nurturing, the precondition for all that is I'm bringing to you emotionally what you need. So notice that actually comes first before the equipping. Some of us have parents who are really like instructive, like you need to do this, you need to do that. If you grew up with like a parent with sports, like where they ran drills with you outside, like sometimes we almost have parents that are a little over doing it on equipping. They always have an opinion about everything.
Right.
Like I like to think of it like nurture is when you till the soil, right? You kind of toss up the soil, get it ready. And then equipping is when you throw the seeds in. So if you throw the seeds on soil, that's just like kind of like packed down from, it's not going to take, nothing's going to grow. You need someone kind of in the dirt with you, kind of like deep in your heart that knows you. And another word for that is just trust. It's attunement. So that when they're giving you equipping, you trust it. And so much of us, some of our trauma is like, well, no, I had a parent who told me the right way to do it, but I just didn't listen to them. And then all my mistakes are my own fault. And then I'm like, well, hold on. Did you have a parent who nurtured emotionally? Because the only way that advice was going to take was if you were also you had that nurture. Yeah. And so you're blaming yourself.
Wow. I'm like shaking up. Brent, you need to hear this.
It's wild.
2 points. Number one, I know it's important to do this, but how would you say it's important to validate your own trauma without invalidating someone else's? I guess you could say, like, I think that's one of the most common things I hear is like, well, I didn't have it as bad as you or that person. Kind of like we were talking about last night. So we like to minimize it and be like, oh, well, that person has it worse, so I can't feel bad about what I went through. But I always tell people, like, an example I always use is like growing up, like obviously, and everyone knows, like, crazy circumstances. Like my mom was an addict. My dad was an addict. My mom, I told you last night, got pregnant with like an 18-year-old guy. That's my half brother, all these things. Yeah. And he was really abusive. Like my dad was abusive. All these different things, right? That was really hard when I went through that. Obviously, as a kid, like it was hard for me. But then I look at like when I moved out and I went and lived with my sister, I went through my first relationship and had my first like heartbreak. And I almost felt like it was like just as hard, even though, one you could look at and be like, you're 16, like it's a heartbreak, get over it, versus, when I was a kid, those were like extreme things. So that's what I feel like I always tell people. But yeah, you'll probably know more on that, is like your heart is your hard because that's what you know to be hard, versus someone else. It's like, yeah, like things I go through now. And I feel that way all the time, on this podcast. Cause like people know I've opened up about my past and my divorce and my childhood. And now I have a famous boyfriend and travel the world and do these fun things. But it's like, I would say that I struggle just as much, if not more. And me and him have been through just as hard things, even though to the world, they're looking and like, she has no reason to complain. She has no reason to be struggling. And it's like, it's crazy because I've been in both scenarios. Mm-hmm. I've been on both ends. I've had no money and all these things and, been divorced and heartbroken and all these things. And now I'm in this situation where I'm so blessed, and I see that.
In some ways.
Yeah, I see the blessing that I have, but I'm also like, there's a lot of hard stuff, but it's so invalidated. And then I also feel like people on the flip end do that, when I talk to people, this guy on the other side of the couch or anyone about their trauma, they're like, well, no. But you had it hard. And I'm like, no, like it's all hard. So it's like, how would you explain that?
Let me ask you a question. And yes. We don't have to go here if you don't want to, but yes. Do you feel like the hardest part with all that is feeling invalidated by other people? Or is there a part of you that feels like you're invalidating yourself?
I think maybe both, because I think that, when you get all the things you think are going to make you happy, and when your circumstances in life are generally better or good, I think because of what I came from, I like am mad at myself that I can't just like be happy and be grateful.
That was my guess.
And it's like, I want to be, and I am, but I almost feel like I've experienced just as much sadness. Now, again, obviously behind closed doors, there's a lot of hard stuff that's gone on in my relationship and with, what people glamorize with fame and all that. There's obviously a lot of negative sides to it.
Totally.
But even bigger than that, it's just like, sometimes it's like, well, dang, like I can see, it's crazy because that's where, my faith comes in. It's like your joy is in Jesus and obviously your habits and all these things, but it's not in these things that you think are just going to make you happy. And once you have this checklist, you're going to feel good.
Gosh, Nicole, it's the most normal thing in the world to think that like, okay, like money and fame and all the exciting things that have come for you and David. It's like, of course there's a part of you that thought that would be way, way, way better. Mm-hmm. And in some ways it is.
Yeah.
And then in some ways it's like, oh, I thought all of that would make this part of my heart feel better. Mm-hmm. And for some reason that got completely untouched by all that outside stuff. And that part still hurts just as bad. Mm-hmm. And then I'm really suffering because that part's still hurting. And then the world is like, well, look at everything great that's going on in your life. You should just be like, you should be fine. And it's like, no, but this part of my heart didn't get touched by all that. Yeah. And it needs to be satiated. It needs to be held. It needs to be healed.
Right.
Man, I thought that some of the incredible things that happened through everything would touch it, and it didn't. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to explain to people. I often find that the accusations that get at me the worst are the ones where there's a part of me that kind of agrees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I would say I feel like that because there is like a guilt or like I can get why. Because like looking back, I would look at people who had healthy relationships or like someone who didn't cheat or abuse them or whatever or anything, like didn't have had a fun job that they loved to do or whatever it was. And I'd be like, oh, but if I was them, I would never complain. Like I would never you kind of cast this judgment.
Yeah. And
now that I'm in that position, I'm like, oh,
yeah,
I guess my perspective has changed.
That judgment has more to do with the discontentment that person's holding. Mm. I mean, that could be jealousy, but that could also just be sadness.
Which was me for sure when I was judging those people. It's like you think there's like solutions, but
I know that for me, like I think there's people where I've been critical of them just in my own heart, and it's because like I don't feel as smart as them, or I feel like they have, I don't know, a certain kind of reputation that I wish I had too, and I feel like they don't deserve it or something. Like there's some sort of complex in me that comes up when I'm being super kind of toxic towards other people, that I have to kind of look in the mirror and be like, oh, well, what's going on with me?
Right.
Because there's probably a piece of it that's true. It's like, I don't know, we're not just critical towards people at random, you know, but often we don't know the full depth of really what's going on for folks, and we're more responding in our own heart.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say you're right. See, that's how you know. Do you hear that, right? You just picked apart exactly what I was feeling. Okay, so yeah, just like I said, there's a couple like so important things. So I love that we talked about like trauma is sometimes what didn't happen, and those 4 pillars of like the 4 basic needs as a kid, what you need. So how do you identify as an adult or someone in their teenagers? How do you even identify, oh, I have trauma, I maybe need some healing? Like, what are ways that anyone who's watching this or hearing this can be like, do I have trauma?
Look at the behaviors that need to change. That's your compass. What's the stuff that you do that you don't like that you do? And
then getting down to like why you do it.
Yeah.
There's probably a reason.
I mean, and just on like a practical, you know, level, it's like, this can be done in journaling. This can be done when talking to a friend. But just like, okay, what do I feel in my body when this happens? So going back to an example of like someone doesn't text me back and I feel really agitated. What do I feel in my body? I feel like, oh, this racing energy, this like my heart rate is going up. Okay. What I like to do is float back that memory and think, have I ever felt this way before in my body? Almost use the body as like the GPS. Have I ever felt this way before? I was like, well, yeah, I kind of felt this way growing up with my mom. I kind of felt this way with my brother. I felt this way in school. And then you kind of think through that. I was like, okay, well, what part of that experience is similar to this? It's not the same thing, but is there any similarities? Oh yeah, well, you know, in school, I kind of felt like an idiot. And in this case, I kind of feel like an idiot. Ah, okay. Well, I wonder if 10% of like me responding to this situation is coming from that school thing. So then you can kind of, and then this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, write out what it was like to go through that. Not just, okay, I went to school, I got bad grades, my teacher got mad at me, yelled at me in front of the class, and then I felt terrible. It's like, hold on, no, what was it like? Oh, I felt like an idiot and everyone knew I was an idiot and that everyone was thinking it. Like I felt this, I felt that. And so when you can go to that, then sharing that with someone you trust, that's where some of these steps of healing, it's like, there's not a lot of people, you know, that can afford to pay for this, you know, big fancy trauma therapists that might cost a bunch of money if you don't have the right insurance. But that doesn't mean healing is only for people who can afford counseling. Like, I think healing is one of the most human things. Like, we all know how the body wants to heal. And that's where I think what's so cool about our time of being able to bring these tools and ideas to TikTok or to YouTube or these different places is like people are grabbing onto it more than ever before. Because I think the default orientation of the human heart is to want to move towards healing.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah. And then when you grab those tools and you use them, they make ground.
Yeah.
And it's never at the pace that you want it to be. You would love it if it would just be like, snap your fingers, it's done.
Wouldn't we all?
And it's never as comfortable as we want it to be.
Yeah.
But it is there.
Wow. That's so good, Matthias. And yeah, if you guys, you know, are in the place where you can afford therapy, do it. But also, like Matthias said, it's so cool that there are helpful tools and ways. And it seems like what I love about this conversation, it seems like you're really simplifying what I think, you know, the healing is and like it's being understood in the things that we went through. And like you said, there's these steps that we can do. But obviously, if you guys feel like, you know, lost or like you need healing, go to Matthias's page. He's obviously going to talk a lot more in depth about all these things. You know. Well,
can I offer one more? Is that okay? I just had another one pop in my mind.
Yes.
I just want to give it to folks listening. But like another question to ask yourself again, in like in a journaling exercise or something is, what am I afraid will happen if this goes wrong? And that seems a little weird, like obvious, but we often don't go there. Okay, they don't text me back. Okay, what am I really afraid of? I'm afraid they hate me. Okay. And then what happens? Like, I love asking that question. Sometimes I'll ask that question 10 times in a row to a client. And then what happens? What do you mean? And then what happens? No, like, okay, they hate you. What happens after that? They break up with me. Okay. And then what happens? Then I'm alone. Okay. When was a time that you felt completely alone? I was like, oh, shoot. Yeah. And then something pops up. So sometimes following that trail back of like, and then what happens?
Can help you identify.
Yeah. It's same thing with people pleasing. It's like,
yeah,
gosh, like, oh, I feel like I can't, say no. I feel like I can't stand up for myself. I set a boundary. Okay. What happens if you set the boundary? What are you afraid will happen?
Right.
Well, they'll get really mad. They'll get really frustrated. Okay. And then what happens? And then we'll get like sidetracked. We'll be like, oh, well, I shouldn't really do this. I shouldn't really be worried about it because it would probably be fine. And I'm like, hold on. I'm not asking like your brain. Yeah. I'm asking your heart.
Right.
What is your heart afraid will happen? What are the emotions afraid will happen? Even if it doesn't feel logical. What is that? Well, I feel like I'm a bad person if I say no. I feel like to say no is like to be like a burden or to be like needy. Like I have all this stuff and da-da-da-da. Okay. What was a time in your life that you felt like this needy burden? And then it's like, oh, gosh, I felt like that. There wasn't a time I didn't feel like that.
Yeah.
That's like, good. Start with one. What's the first memory that pops in your mind? Think through that. So it's like being able to draw a connection back to those experiences where the emotions were felt is really, in my opinion, the best way to go. Because if the trauma is about what didn't happen, then you don't have this big memory of like, well, when he threw that at you or something.
It's more about how you felt.
Yeah, how you felt in the gap, how you felt in having to be alone and having to reckon with like, oh, I'm not okay. And the only thing I can look at is myself. Yeah. So that must mean it's me. Right. And it's like in those moments that has to be really seen and felt. What was it like to feel that way? Yeah. Wow. That's the stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah. These are such good questions. This is what gets me so excited about doing this. And yeah, it's just like, it's so cool. So awesome. Yeah. I have no words, but okay. A couple other important questions, if that's okay with you.
Love it. I'm here for it.
Okay. So we talked about all these things. Let me go back. I just don't want to miss anything that's so important. Yeah, I guess that's kind of the next question, which you kind of answered a little bit. But once we identified that we maybe do have some trauma that is resulting in some negative behaviors that we don't quite understand, what can we do? Like other than what's the first thing you should do when you kind of start to identify? What's that next move?
Well, I think that we were talking about the witnessing idea, the witnessing stage. This is something that I think we need to share with someone we trust. And I think some people might be able to kind of like just engage it in a journaling exercise and get a lot out of that. For most folks, for me, like sometimes all that vulnerable stuff just feels really overwhelming and I don't know what to do with it. And I'm just going to fall into like this slump and get depressed and it's going to feel super dark and heavy. So being able to have someone else hold that with you is huge. And whether that's therapy, a friend, siblings that you trust, I think that this is a journey we take with other people. A quote that I love, I don't know who said it first, but is we were hurt by other people and we heal with other people.
That's true.
We were traumatized by others, we heal with others. And so I think that first step is reaching out. So whether that's to a therapist, if someone's, I don't know, like younger and like, oh, I don't like know how to reach out to a therapist. Like you're in high school or something. It's like your school counselor is a great person to talk to. A teacher that you really trust is a great person to just talk to. And you could say like, hey, I kind of want to talk about this with somebody. Maybe that's you, maybe it's not, but like, this is what's on my heart. This is what's on my mind. I really feel like I could use some help. That's great people to talk to.
That's awesome. Sweet. Okay. To the next thing that's so important. This is one that I really want to talk about because I feel like this is one of the reasons people wrestle with trauma so much and like validating themselves in it. How do you validate yourself in maybe an experience with a parent that didn't do something or that did, without the hate or the bitterness? Like, what do you do? It's kind of like, I feel like with trauma, it's like you want someone to blame, right? There's got to be like the bad guy, the victim, right? And so it's like, I think a lot of the times why people invalidate themselves in that is because they don't want to point at a bad guy.
Yeah. Most people I know don't want to like beat up on their parents. That's the common experience. I think we almost get a little bit nervous around trauma stuff because of that. We're like, oh, I don't want to make my parent be out like this villain or this bad guy. Because like I had good parents and they loved me. And that's true. Like, I think that just because someone loved you and did their best doesn't mean you didn't go through trauma. Like, both can happen at the same time. And that's hard because it feels like it needs to be one or the other. But I love my parents. And there's things that happened that hurt. And some of it wasn't even on purpose. Some of it wasn't like they tried to hurt me. But it still hurt. And so here's maybe on the other side, there's folks who feel that bitterness, feel like they really have a lot of that anger and they feel like it hasn't been seen and justified. And here's what I'll say. It's like, there's two parts to every emotional wound. There's the actual gap, the actual damage that was done. And then there's the story we write about it. The story isn't the thing that needs to be validated in order for you to heal. The gap, the damage needs to be seen in order for you to heal. And it feels like, well, those are the same thing. And I would say be flexible on the story, but hone in on what it was like, the damage. And
like what that felt like.
Yeah. So for example, let's say that you have someone that's like, oh, my parents never really saw me. They didn't really care about me. They always loved my sister way more. Like my sister was always the center of attention. She was always the one that they cared about. I was in the background. They didn't even care about me. Screw mom and dad. And then mom and dad come back and they say, your sister was ill. We were in the hospital with your sister. We thought we were going to lose her. But we weren't paying attention to her because like we loved her more. It's just, we thought she was going to die. Like, what do you mean? Like, we didn't love you or you in the background? Like, that's preposterous. And then this is where parents sometimes make huge mistakes. They invalidate the story instead of realizing, hey, there's damage. There's a gap there. Because this person didn't get the love and attention and time with mom and dad they desired.
So it's almost like there doesn't need to be a bad guy. It's just about
sometimes
what you expect. And depending on the situation.
Yeah. And maybe we'll make one caveat to that. In a lot of cases, it's not so much that, well, they didn't mean to, they did their best. It's like, that is almost kind of beside the point. I'm thinking like, what was the damage that was actually done and has that been witnessed? Like, because maybe mom and dad should have realized that this other sibling needed more attention and it is their fault. And they were really nervous and they were scared about their daughter who was in the hospital. And that's the most understandable thing in the world. That doesn't change the fact that they kind of failed when it came to emotionally supporting their other kid. So that's not to say like, oh, it's not their fault. There's no bad guy. I think like when we say bad guy, what we sometimes mean is like this malicious, I did it on purpose just to hurt you. Yeah. I don't know of a lot of parents who are just trying on purpose to hurt their kids. There are certainly narcissistic, abusive, like there are evil people in the world who do traumatize and use their kids. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. And even not that it's like this tiny, tiny minority experience. Like I think I run into people a lot in my line of work who experience that. I'm saying though, for anyone listening, that's like, oh no, I don't think my mom was like trying on purpose to hurt me. But on the other hand, I feel really, really angry. It's like, well, yeah, that there was some dimension of safety, nurture, encouragement, equipping that was not done properly. And you don't need to get them to do that now in order for you to heal because you're an adult, or if you're listening and you're in high school, you're getting close to being an adult and you have more resources and abilities now than you did back then to be able to fill those places in your heart. And that's actually a huge aha moment. Like, when you're a kid, and using that example of the sister in the hospital, when you're a kid, it's like you got up for school, you got ready for school on your own. You didn't have anyone there to make your lunch. You didn't have a lunch. So you went to school and you were hungry at lunchtime, and mom and dad didn't even notice because they were at the hospital with your sister and you just felt like you didn't even matter. It's like the big aha moment is now you can make your own lunch. Now you can get up and create a routine where you feel really whole and you feel like you get to connect to what's meaningful to you. And you can reach out and create connections. If you feel lonely, you can reach out to a friend. You can reach out to people who are, that you love and that you trust, and surround yourself. And that's like, well, hold on, does that past stuff not matter? And it's like, no, it matters entirely. You have to witness that in order to know what you need to do in the present. And what I mean is like, oh, why am I depressed all the time? It's like, well, my parents didn't really pay attention to me a lot because my sister was ill. Oh, What are the ways I needed them to pay attention to me in the past? Oh, this way, this way, this way. Getting ready for school, making my lunch, Okay, I need to make sure to pay attention to myself now in the ways that I wasn't paid attention to back then. Because here's the big reality. The past is done. The past already happened. That doesn't exist anymore. When we're talking about the inner child, when we're talking about the part of you that's still trapped in the past, those are metaphors. That's not real. Those are analogies.
Yeah.
And they're speaking to real emotional realities internally, but that's not to confuse the metaphysical reality that the past is done. And here's the good news about that. You survived it. You got through the worst part. The hardest part was actually experiencing it.
Yeah, you're like,
you
no,
did
that's all
that.
right. Yeah.
You're fine. You're here now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still a piece of the past that you've brought into the present. And healing trauma is actually about putting it back in the past. And you don't do that by shaming yourself. You don't do that by being like, oh, I shouldn't be mad about that because that's ridiculous because that was in the past. And no, you do that by witnessing it.
Yeah.
And feeling it deeply.
Because then you can let that be.
Well, you feel it deeply so that, like we were saying, you get the insight into like, oh, here's what I needed then. Here's what should have happened. And then I bring that insight into the past, because the reality is, like, if that wasn't taken care of, if there was trauma, there's things that weren't done in the past. I probably haven't done that for myself either in the present. So I need that insight. So to switch analogies, if you have the people pleaser with like a really critical parents, it's, I don't know, you didn't give yourself a lot of compassion. You didn't really attune. The parents didn't attune emotionally to what was going on. They didn't encourage and sit with and really try to understand. Do you know how to hold that kind of presence for yourself? And have you surrounded yourself with people that's their native language? Is to be like, oh, let's get curious before we get judgmental. Let's press in before we shut it down. And then when you start to move into those moments, it's like, oh, I'm doing for myself what I didn't have for me as a kid. And that actually starts to fill a bucket in your heart. Because the thing that needs corrected is you can't time travel and go back to the past and change the past. That's not the thing that needs to change. What needs to change is I am still acting as if the past is real in the present. And it's getting in the way of me being able to meaningfully connect to relationships here now. Me being able to take care of myself now.
That's crazy.
Does that make sense? It's a little abstract.
It's crazy how trauma works. No, it makes perfect sense.
Okay,
I think that's why it bleeds into everything. Cool. Well, I have 2 more main pillars I want to talk about. We went over something that's so important. But with all that being said, I think another topic that people talk about a lot is and I want to ask you, because you obviously have this great advice.
Sure.
When dealing with toxic parents, loved ones, partner, someone who may be unhealthy, who is emotionally, physically abusive, anything. But yeah, when you're dealing with a toxic loved one, or like I said, just anyone in your life. And again, it's what does toxic mean? Which you could probably explain, but boundaries. Is that how you can be and coexist with people in your life that maybe you can't remove or that you don't need to fully remove? What's the solution to toxicity?
That's great. I'm trying to decide between 2 metaphors. Hold on, give me just a sec.
It's a big question.
It's a great question. Okay. Yes. Okay. I'm going to switch metaphors from toxicity.
Okay.
Because boundaries, you could think of a boundary almost like when we're in some sort of conflict with someone who's acting in a toxic way, it creates an injury. It creates some sort of damage emotionally, relationally between you and me, right? So you could think what are the ways that you deal with an injury on your body? If I sprained my wrist, if I broke my wrist, what would I do?
Put a cast on it.
Right. So if I sprained my wrist, I'd wrap it up in one of those little ace bandages, right? The little cotton, little cloth things. Because what's the point of that? Why do I do that? It's so that my arm will only stay in a way that's healthy, and it will limit my arm from bending into places that are unhealthy. Does that make sense? It's I'm restricting movement only to what's healthy. And if there's movement that's unhealthy, I'm limiting the ability for the relationship to move into unhealthy places.
So that's how you would kind of describe boundaries.
That's what I think boundaries are. Boundaries aren't just separation from other people. I think it's structure aimed at healing the relationship. And depending on how bad the injury is, depending on how bad the injury is, you need to have a corresponding level of structure or boundaries, right? So if it's really intense, it's really toxic behavior. It's like, really intense criticism. We might put a cast on. We might put one of those big shoulder things that are like, so that like my arms, like there's bolts and screws. We might do surgery because the corresponding level of structure is always, in relation to the damage that's been done.
Wow.
An ace bandage isn't going to help if I like got my arm run over by a truck.
Right. It's going to take a little bit more. Yep.
So that's how I think about boundaries. And then to move over to toxicity, because I want to hit both metaphors because that sounds fun. Toxicity, what would you do if you were in like the physical presence of a toxin? So like someone is sick, what would you do? You would kind of get some distance.
Put a mask on, get some distance, or remove yourself.
Yeah. You would remove to some degree. If it was like just kind of a light cold, you're right. Like maybe a mask, maybe we just don't like, eat off the same plate. If it was like something really intense, I might not come over. I might just talk to you on the phone. Right. Like, and then all the way to the point of like probably the most, maybe just for this metaphor, like a really intense form of toxicity is something that's like autoimmune, or it's like if I catch it, then I start attacking myself. If I start falling into this level of toxicity, then my own immune system starts to mistake what's really happening and starts to eat away at me. And that, I think, is something that I see happen in relationships all the time, where it's like me being around you makes me mean towards me. And that's
like just spreads the toxicity around.
Yeah. And then the toxicity is like my own cells are starting to eat up me. And so it's like, I think about, kind of using both. It's what is the damage that's really present? And then you have to correspond that with some sort of structure or some kind of boundary in order to regain health. Again, like the boundary isn't there to punish. It isn't there to change the behavior. That's an ultimatum, right? It's there purely to hold the relationship in place to maintain health. And if that means a cutoff is the only way that can be healthy, I mean, that's what like frostbite is, right? So I used to live in the mountains up in Washington. And the reason I wore nice hiking shoes is because if I got frostbite, it's not like I can just put a bandage on that and that'll heal.
Right.
I have to cut off the damaged tissue, because if it stays on my toe, then it's going to threaten my entire body. It could get infected, and then my whole body can be threatened because of the presence of that damaged tissue. So I cut off the tissue to save the rest of my body. And some relationships get to that place. Yeah. Does that make sense? That's why I like thinking about it. That makes
so much sense. That was like the best explanation I've probably ever heard of.
Oh, I'm glad.
Of boundaries and toxicity.
Yeah, I think
so good.
Boundaries are kind of unclear. It's like, I just tell people what they should do.
Yeah.
Or what I'm going to do if they don't do what I want them to do, and then that fixes the relationship somehow. And I'm like, no, that just makes people lonely and angry and just makes everyone fight.
And they really can be loving. It can be like a protection, like you said.
Yeah, a cast is a loving thing to do.
To maintain health, like you said.
Doctors aren't being mean by putting casts on broken bones. Yeah.
So cool. So good. Well, this has been so fun. The last thing that I feel like, we've covered so much good stuff.
Yeah, it's been a good one.
So good. Last thing I kind of want to get into is talk a little bit about all of this, which honestly, this conversation is so eye-opening too, because I think that therapy and healing is so misconstrued online and just in general. And I think that it can get mixed in with a lot of ritualistic things, a lot of intense things. And, you simplified it so much in this conversation, which is so cool, which I'm so excited for people to hear that. Cause it's like, it's really simple. Yeah. It's complex, but like, but yeah, I guess just to dive a little bit into, obviously you guys know, I'm a believer. I believe in Jesus. I'm a Christian, and you are as well. And so I guess there's this, I want to bridge that gap. We kind of talked about this earlier, though. I feel like, Christians and I'm just going to be blunt because like I said, this podcast is all about just being like super, just say it how it is. There's this like intensity of like, oh, pray away the anxiety, pray away the trauma. God can heal you. And it's like, hey, I believe in God's healing power 1000%. But like, kind of just what we talked about yesterday. Like I always tell people, I told you, oh yeah, Jesus in therapy saved my life. Cause when I came to the Lord, I left the Mormon church. When I left the Mormon church, I was separated from my ex-husband, going through a really bad separation, got divorced. Through that, found Jesus, started a relationship with him, started reading the Bible, and also was in therapy. And both of them were so important. Like ultimately I credit all to God because he was the one that put me in that position to meet that therapist and all these different things. And I was able to, use my Bible for kind of a guideline through therapy. Like that was one thing that I did, is if there was ever anything that my therapist was like, oh, I want you to read this book or do this, I wanted to make sure that it aligned with God's word. And if it was something that didn't, like whatever it may be, That's Buddhist practice or whatever, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to heal through God.
Sure.
But I knew that I needed someone there, and she was so helpful. And so, it's kind of just like this weird thing where it's like, it's not talked about. It's like, oh, well, if you believe in Jesus, just find healing in him, and then there's this invalidation for what's really going on, and oh, let me pray away this and this will break off, and let me do this. And it's like, again, God is that powerful that he could do that. But you said something important yesterday about like sometimes he wants us to work through it.
That's right.
But
we were at dinner.
Let's talk about that.
It's so good. Yeah, we were at dinner, you, me, David, and my wife, Paige. We were all talking about this. And an analogy I used last night that I think is good. My wife actually pointed it out this morning. We were at breakfast. She's like, that was really good, that thing you said. So I should maybe talk about this more, publicly. But I think a lot of Christians go to God asking them to quiet fire alarms when God's trying to give them a signal that there's a fire that they need to deal with.
So good.
And they're like, oh, God, take away the panic attacks. Oh, God, take away the overeating. Take away the temptation for lust. Take away this, take away that. And that, God, I'm having enough faith. And there's almost like this subculture of like, oh, once you have enough faith, once you ask with enough fervent desire, then God will do it. And then if you slip back into it, it's just because you didn't have enough faith or because that was you. And I think that is such chains and bondage, because I think what God really wants to do is use those behaviors as fire alarms to point to the wounds in your own heart. Now, to bring this even just like to scripture, a way that I see this is like when Jesus is at the well with the woman at the well. He says like, hey, if you really knew who I was, I'd give you the water of eternal life. Like, he doesn't just say, take this water real quick, just drink it. You'll be better. You'll be fine. First, he says, where's your husband? And she's like, oh, I don't have a husband. And he's like, yeah, I know the man you're living with now is not your husband. You've had several husbands. He gets to her wounding first. Before the water of life, he's right there with wounding. And I think God wants more than anything to get to the wounding. He doesn't just want you he doesn't want to just take away your symptoms. He wants you to feel healing in your heart.
Right.
And I think so much of us are like, God, heal the symptom. Please quiet the fire alarm. And God's like, if I do that, you'll burn down. And I want to walk with you through these flames. Because I love you more than just quieting your fire alarms.
So good.
Yeah, it's
so good.
It's a kindness.
Yeah.
That God is keeping the panic attacks there until you get down to the wound underneath.
Right.
And it's never within our, like I said, our preferred timeline. We wish that would just happen instantly. But
which builds faith, which is amazing.
Sure.
You know?
And the Bible's full of God walking alongside people for decades. And that's not just to tease them out or just to be withholding. It's like the moment is so intentional on God's part to bring about our flourishing and healing.
Right.
I think about Joseph just being in prison for being blamed for, approaching Potiphar's wife. And like Joseph was sold into slavery as a kid. And it's just the whole story is just terrible things happening to Joseph. But then he's positioned to be like, leading all of Egypt and bringing everyone through a famine. And it's like God using all of this hardship, not just for like the greater good, but also for Joseph's greater good, because Joseph is there. And if you know the story, his brothers come to him. And then there's this wild reversal of he was underneath his brother's thumb being sold into slavery. So he was being abused by his brothers. And now he has the power to abuse his brothers if he wanted to. He could make them starve. And for a moment, he kind of gets a little bit of revenge. He's like, go get your brother. Right. Like, and everyone's just heart-ridden. And then there's this softening of Joseph's heart, and he weeps and he reconnects with his family. And I think that whole circumstance wasn't just to save Israel or Egypt or the lineage. It was to get down at Joseph's heart and to heal his wounding.
Yeah.
And to give him opportunities throughout all of that to get to the core. So I see that over and over in scripture.
Yeah, I agree. I always tell people like God walked through my trauma with me. Like when I gave my life to him, there was a lot of things I thought he would just, God, I believe you're a miracle worker. Do this. Yeah. God, heal my marriage. And it's like a lot of those things. God, make my parents stop doing this, all these things. And none of those things happened. But like me walking through them with him was so healing. And also like, it's so funny. People always laugh at my life. It's like a very redemptive story. But when you think about kind of a redemption that kind of heals that damage that happened, that's been my life. And, David is so great and has been so healing in so many ways, and kind of walking through a similar life that I prayed that God wouldn't put me in has healed a lot of that brokenness from my past.
We call that a corrective experience in psychology world.
Yep, that's pretty much been my life. And it's been cool because I'm able to give God the glory for that, but also to recognize, just like sometimes the things that we want and desire aren't what's best for us, and God knows what we need. And I feel like I've experienced so much healing, through kind of having to be put in similar situations that trigger me, because then God's able to heal that. Like Certainly. He's able to expose that trigger that and then like rewire that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and there's errors we make in those spaces too. Like I was just thinking about the story of Moses out in the desert. It's like there's moments when we really are desperate and we really are struggling, and then we try to come to our own rescue and cope in a way that actually isn't really helpful. Like Moses striking that rock to get water. And that actually is what separates us from being able to enter the promised land, so to speak. And when really God's goal the whole time was just like to humble your heart, to bring dependence and trust and love into that connection, to then bring them into the promised land and give them everything.
Yep.
And it's our efforts to try to shortchange and speed up and take in our own power, things that really belong to that healing hand of God, that actually can separate us from the promised land that our hearts really desires. To use that as an analogy.
So crazy. So that's a great analogy. It's so good.
Yeah, it's that's the heart of it. I love this. I never get to preach. I have so many of these little
no, it's
sermons.
So good.
I got to get out here somewhere.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say about that, just being a Christian and all that. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, obviously meeting you and knowing people that believe and understand all this. I feel like there's two extremes, But yeah, the last thing I'll share is something that helped me when I first started my therapy journey, because I was such a codependent people pleaser who had no love or respect for myself. But a verse that stuck with me and still does is Matthew 22:39. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And we talked about this last night, but with my therapist, she used to be like, you have to love yourself. You have to love yourself. And I was like, well, I'm a Christian though. I'm supposed to be Christ-like. I'm supposed to love others. Wow. Like, you think you have to be this like sacrificial, selfless person. Yeah. I'm like, no, like I don't need to love myself. I don't want to be on the self-love movement. And she was like, okay, take your Bible home, do some digging. And that was the verse I found. And it spoke to me like it never had before, because I was like, oh, if I'm loving my neighbor as I love myself, I'm pretty mean to my neighbor. I don't really love my neighbor. I don't care about their emotions, their feeling. Like, I looked at all the ways that I treated myself.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, if that's how I treat myself and God calls me to love my neighbor as I love me, I'm not going to be able to love my neighbor correctly.
Wow.
And so that made me realize like I need to have that self-love. Yeah. And that doesn't mean I need to think I'm the greatest thing in the world and like the self-love.
There's a translation error. I've thought a lot about this. I've never talked about this publicly yet. I'm going to make a big deal about it at some point.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but there's just literally a language issue between psychology world and Christian world where self means something different in both of those worlds. So in psychology world, what they mean when they say self-love is loving the imago Dei. So loving like the true, like God image in your bones, like loving what is transcendent and good and true and glorious in the self, right? So even people who aren't Christians that don't, maybe hold the Christian theology, they have an awareness that there's something divine in the human person. We are made in the image of God. So, and they can recognize that, even though they describe it in different ways, and they don't have the vocabulary we'd use. Like, we're like, oh, there's something divine about that. And when you love and draw attention to the God image in you, things go better for you. Even if you're not a Christian, just by doing that, things go way better. So there's like self-love, God image love actually does draw it out. That's what I think is really happening. So the psychology word for like self that I think Christians get caught up on is ego. And so that's what psychology world would call like, essentially the flesh, in Christian world. So I think whenever you hear self in psychology world, think imago Dei. And then when you hear ego in psychology world, think flesh. And so Christians are out here like, oh, self-love. I shouldn't love my flesh. What do you mean loving flesh? That's preposterous to love my old self, lost in sin, love my sin. That's wrong. And I'm like, no, you're just misunderstanding. I think it's just like
there's a translation error.
There's a translation error. Like, what they mean, and they're saying it because, and what are we going to expect people who are not Christians to describe it in our words? Like, no, we can't expect that. So like, let me just tell you, as someone who's kind of a double agent in both camps here, like, here's what they mean. They mean imago Dei, like image of God self, and then ego in flesh are kind of synonymous. So I feel like if that was cleared up, I get so irritated at pastors. I've had conversations with pastors about this. Like, I know a lot of folks who are like preaching and kind of like a larger stage in front of a lot of people. And they're like, yeah, this self-love stuff from psychology is terrible and it's wrong and don't listen to it. And I'm like, my guy. And I'll text them after hearing that sermon. I'm like, stop it.
You're
stop.
Like, wait.
Like, and I'll write that out the way I just explained it to you. And then they're like, oh. And I'm like,
no, that makes a ton of sense.
You're preventing people from going to therapy and actually getting some help. And it's just a misunderstanding. You're just literally misunderstanding the point.
I'm so glad we talked about that. Because that everything you just said, I'm like, yes, times 100. So it's different than what is portrayed. So Christians who are watching this, I hope this speaks to you. But I have so many things I could say, but I'll just ask quickly before we kind of close out. Obviously, I'll do our whole little thing. But is there anything on your heart or your mind that you feel like you want to share before we end this? I feel like you didn't get to say.
Let me think for a moment. I'll take in that question. Yeah, I don't know if this is even the majority of people listening. Maybe it's just a few people listening. So maybe this is just for them. But it can be really easy to feel like, well, I don't think my stuff is really that big of a deal. And I don't think maybe it counts as trauma. And even if it did, even if it was trauma, I'm not sure I could be like one of those people who could heal. Like, my stuff just feels so overwhelming and so like I've just been stuck in it for so long that I think this is just who I am. And this is just my situation. And I just want to breathe a little bit of hope and just say, like, I used to feel that way too. I've talked to dozens of clients who have used those same words. And you're not alone. You're not alone feeling like, I don't know if the stuff I've dealt with really matters that much. And even if it did, if it could actually change. And I just want to give you a little bit of curiosity to see, like, what if there was healing there? What could life look like? So that's what I want to leave on.
So good. Well, thanks for sharing that, Matthias. Also, thank you for being here. Oh my goodness.
This was great.
This was amazing. So healing. And like, even, David's manager is back there and he's been watching it.
Now we got to schedule some sessions. Let's go. Yeah.
Hey, but thank you so much for coming on. Such an honor. Like, seriously, like the coolest thing ever. And I know that this is going to help so many people and impact so many people. And I just want to encourage you guys that, I agree with what Matthias said, just like there is healing for you, and I'm still learning and I'm still healing and I'm still growing. But I will say, like, if you would have met me, 2.5 years ago, I wouldn't have ever believed that I'd be in the place I'm at today and have the love for myself and others that I can have and the peace that I have. And it's a journey, it's a journey, still working, but But yeah, and then I guess I'll just close it out by asking, how can we support you, Matthias? What can we do?
Yeah, so I'm just Matthias J Barker. I'm sure you'll put it in show notes or whatever, but Matthias J Barker just on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you look at stuff.
You probably are backed out on clients, but is that something that's open?
Well, I'm only licensed in the state of Washington, and there's a pretty long wait list. So I actually do have that open, but it's one of those things where it'll probably be over a year before I could actually talk to somebody.
Gotcha.
And but I do have that open, and then I'm doing like some group therapy stuff. So sometimes, like there really is actually a chance of getting to talk, in those cases, if you're in Washington.
Awesome.
But I do workshops. And so that's probably like the biggest way. And then part of my workshops that I do is I do kind of these live Q&As where I actually talk to people for like 10, 15 minutes, like over Zoom, like in front of the group. And so it's not just kind of like, oh, you kind of buy this pre-recorded thing and it's like, whatever. It's like, there is some real interaction there. So if anyone's listening and kind of wants to, I don't know, kind of unpack some of this stuff. Yeah. Even though it isn't the same as therapy, doing some of those workshops or courses and then getting to kind of jump into some Q&A and get to hear other people's experiences and maybe even have some, conversation with me is something I'd be honored to take with anybody.
Cool.
So yeah,
that's
what
awesome.
I'm up to in the world.
So you guys know how you can support him and, he's rare. There's definitely good therapists, but you're a good one.
You're kind. That's sweet.
But yeah, we appreciate you coming on and like I said, go follow him, go support him, go listen to his workshops, go to his podcast. You have a podcast where you talk in depth about a lot more of this stuff that we touched on today. So I'll close this episode out by saying, thank you for coming. And now I'm forgetting, what's my thing I say? I haven't filmed in a couple weeks. Oh my gosh. Oh, wait. Oh, what elephants are in your guys' room? My name is Nicole and I will talk to you guys next week. All right.
That was great. That was awesome.
Oh, wait, what do I say?
What's my tagline?